I say to all the people of Northern Ireland that we want a Stormont that is based on firm foundations. To do that, we need to remove the rubble of the protocol that has undermined our economy, that has inhibited our ability to trade within our own country, that has changed our constitutional status without our consent, a protocol that every day is harming businesses and driving up the cost of living for every single person in Northern Ireland. I will not rest until this matter is resolved, and the sooner that happens, the better.
Well, as the debate began, the First Minister-designate, Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill, was highly critical of both the DUP and the Tory government.
Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP are in a perpetual standoff with the public, the majority of whom they do not speak for or indeed represent. He stood for election, yet failed to show up. This is his mess and a failure of leadership by him and his party. Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP have left us all at the mercy of the heartless and dysfunctional Tory government, whose own survival is all that ever counts. The Tories care less for the consequences of their dire policy decisions and their political choices on the lives of workers and families here. Jeffrey Donaldson points the finger at everyone else for the DUP's own indefensible and enduring failures.
Well, let's just show you the scene live now inside Stormont as politicians have gathered this lunchtime. We are going to bring you all the updates from Stormont as we get them. First, though, let's reflect on how we arrived at this point. And Northern Ireland has had a power-sharing government between nationalist and unionist political parties. It was created in 1998 following the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, this helped to end over 30 years of violent conflict known as the Troubles. But after 19 years, Stormont collapsed in January 2017 when Sinn Féin ended power sharing over the Democratic Unionist Party's handling of a green energy scheme. For 3 years, Stormont was in a freeze with progress on many important issues stalled. In January 2020, a deal was drafted to restore Northern Ireland's government. Both parties accepted the deal, paving the way for power sharing to be restored. But by February 2022, the DUP's First Minister, Paul Givan, resigned in protest at the Northern Ireland Protocol. While Stormont didn't completely collapse at this point, it's only been functioning in a limited capacity. Well, our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, has been following events at Stormont this lunchtime. So, David, tell us what we've heard and where this leaves the Northern Ireland Assembly.
Well, Anna, you've given us the timeline to this point over the last 25 years, arguably. Let me give you the brief timeline going forward. If the Northern Ireland Assembly has failed to form a government by midnight tonight, then ministers who've been there in a kind of shadow form since the Assembly was dissolved for the election 6 months ago cease to hold office, at which point the civil service effectively steps in to govern Northern Ireland. And for many people, that is a disaster in the middle of a cost of living crisis, the fact that there would be no ministers in place. Also, at 1 minute past midnight, the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, is legally obliged to signal that we're going back to the polls. A £6.5 million election probably taking place before Christmas. And many people find that astonishing, considering that if there is no agreement on how a government will be formed, we could very well find ourselves back in exactly the same position after an Assembly election. And if that happens, then we really will be in uncharted territory, because the British and Irish governments would probably have to return to the negotiating table 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement to try and devise some kind of new form of governance that might just work for Northern Ireland. And of course, this trail of difficulty can be traced right back to Brexit, because Brexit posed a greater challenge to Northern Ireland than any other part of the UK because of its land border with the Republic. The DUP championed Brexit, but ultimately it resulted in the Northern Ireland Protocol. That was the compromise Boris Johnson struck with the EU. He established a trade border in the Irish Sea instead between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom to avoid a need for a tangible border on this island. The DUP say that is not acceptable. It treats Northern Ireland differently to any other part of the United Kingdom, and until it's gone, they say they're not prepared to return to the power-sharing government. And all of that means that Northern Ireland really is without a functioning administration at the height of a cost of living crisis.